I would like to welcome all of the participants today to the E4 Carolinas update from Santee Cooper. My name is Bonnie Loomis, and I am Managing Director for South Carolina for E4 Carolinas. And in my role, I staff the South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force. And many of you may recall that this task force came into being last year in July of 2020, when the former South Carolina Clean Energy Business Alliance joined E4 Carolinas in what has proven to be a really productive and mutually beneficial relationship for both organizations. I think it's strengthened our ability to strive toward clean energy collaborative, stakeholder-driven clean energy policy development and market awareness in South Carolina. And we've been happy to serve as the anchor to a certain extent for E4 Carolinas in the South Carolina area. E4 Carolinas has been in existence for about 10 years and is a trade organization with over 150 members, all representing different aspects of the energy industry. And headquartered in Charlotte, I would say probably, I hope this is a fair statement, I think it is, that E4 Carolinas has had a significant presence in the North Carolina area for the entire time of its existence, and saw a need to further their stakeholder base in South Carolina, further the membership base in South Carolina. And so we began conversations late 2019 in this regard, and here we are today, over a year later, and it has been a real productive partnership for both organizations. I am noticing that the E4 Carolinas board chair, Jeff Merrifield, who is a partner with Pillsbury Law, is on the line with us. And Jeff, I admit that we haven't spoken about you offering any words of welcome, but I would like to offer you that opportunity, given that you're with us right now.
Bonnie, hold on a second. There we go. Thank you very much.
I apologize for putting you on the spot like that. It's not the right thing to do.
No worries.
I know you can handle it.
No worries. No, it is indeed a pleasure to be here with you all today. On behalf of the entire board of E4 Carolinas, as Bonnie mentioned, we were very happy to see our ability to further our long-term growth in South Carolina. That's been a commitment since the organization was first formed in 2012, and actually reaches out to the Carolinas nuclear cluster, which began in South Carolina in 2008. So it has long been our desire to have a more engaged footprint in the state of South Carolina, and we've been very happy to have Bonnie and the rest of the team join us. We have a lot of exciting events that we've been able to conduct so far, and I think a very good future going forward for both states. As a former commissioner of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, having followed the events at Santee Cooper, very interested in the presentation today, and look forward to a great set of presentations. So again, thank you, and look forward to a great meeting today.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. And again, we're grateful to have Santee Cooper with us. Before I move further into a couple of housekeeping notes for today and introducing the South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force co-chairs and the Santee Cooper team, I'd like to point out on a note of personal interest from my end, I am actually coming to you from my home in Murrells Inlet, where in December of this year, I became a direct serve customer of Santee Cooper. So it's neat to be able to have this event and know that the very technology that we're using is being powered by Santee Cooper. I've talked with Jeff about this, Jeff Penland with Santee Cooper, who I'll introduce in a minute, a couple of different times, but this is the first time in my life, and I am a native South Carolinian, that I've been a Santee Cooper customer. I spent the vast majority of my life as a SCE&G or now Dominion Energy customer, either growing up in Mount Pleasant or living in the Columbia area. And I've always been interested in the Santee Cooper operations. And it's really neat now to be able to feel like as a residential customer, I can ask for an update and have basically the entire senior leadership team from the CEO on out come together and have almost 100 of my friends at this point now join us to hear about the things that are being done to continue to serve me, my family, and others who are benefited from Santee Cooper. We will today ask that you keep yourself on mute in order to, of course, prevent background noise and other interruptions for the speakers. We invite you to keep your video on. We also recognize that it may be more comfortable to keep your video off, and in particular, at times, bandwidth issues may require that. So feel free to do either. This group is willing to entertain questions, and we will do that throughout the presentation via chat. And if you have questions, we would like for you to chat them. And our South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force co-chairs are going to be the recipients, so to speak, of those questions, and we'll be posing them to Santee Cooper's speakers as we go through the presentation. We're just going to have a couple of questions after each person's portion of the presentation, and we will hold other questions to the end of this time that we have together. So be alert for your opportunities to chat questions, and be aware that we may not ask all questions. We are mindful of time, and we need to move through the presentation expeditiously. So we will be holding some questions to the end of the presentation. And before I go further, while we have everyone's attention right up front, I would like to put in a shameless plug for the 2021 South Carolina Clean Energy Conference and Southeast Energy Law Seminar that will be hosted by E4 Carolinas, produced through the South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force. This year, the conference will be moving to Greenville, South Carolina, and it'll be held in early December. Be on the lookout for an email to come today if you are on our subscriber list with a little bit more detail. We'll have a lot more detail next week, but until then, save the dates of December 9th and 10th on your calendar for that event. We are planning for it to be held in person. We are mindful of the continuing COVID situation. We are planning for a live stream option, and that gives us the ability to pivot entirely to live stream if that proves necessary in December. For now, as one of my favorite artists sings, Johnny Cash, his song "Lord Willin' and the Creek Don't Rise," I'm rephrasing it. Lord Willin' and the COVID don't rise. We're going to be in person in Greenville for the first time since 2019, in person, and for the first time ever in Greenville this December. We are joined today by Weston Adams, who is a partner with Nelson Mullins Law Firm, and he is co-chair of their energy practice group. He is also a co-chair of our South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force. We also have Brian Stone, President and CEO of Lockhart Power, and he is the other co-chair of our South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force. And obviously, Weston is a lawyer. Brian is an engineer. So I have the pleasure of a very balanced skill set in my task force co-chairs. It's always interesting to work with them because they do bring different perspectives. And so we have divided up the speakers from Santee Cooper. I don't know, actually, Weston and Brian, if I said this to y'all, but I tried to keep an eye toward your professional backgrounds and assign the ones that might have a little bit more engineering type questions, those speakers, to Brian, and the ones who have less technical and more policy focused and customer facing questions to Weston. So we will now hear from Jeff Penland, a member of the Santee Cooper team, who I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with for probably 3 decades, at least 2.5.
Yeah, it's been a little while, Bonnie.
Jeff and I both are former staff members of the South Carolina Senate and have crossed paths in many ways from a government affairs perspective, in particular over the last decade after I joined Duke Energy as a part of their government affairs team and then continued to work on energy related policy issues at the State House. Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you for you to introduce yourself and the Santee Cooper team.
Thank you, Bonnie, and good morning, everybody. And thank you, E4 Carolinas, for this opportunity to share some of Santee Cooper's story. Weston, Brian, Bonnie, and Jess, we appreciate you working with us this morning. We're going to give you an overview of Santee Cooper on several fronts. You've got presenting to you today Mark Bonsall, our president and CEO. He joined Santee Cooper a little over two years ago. Santee Cooper, in my opinion, has been in a new chapter of its story over the last 2 years, and Mark has done an incredible job operationally, financially, resource-wise for Santee Cooper, and you're going to hear some of that today. You're also going to hear from Pamela Williams, who's our Chief Public Affairs Officer and General Counsel, Charlie Duckworth, who is in charge of resource planning, our Deputy CEO and Chief Planning and Innovation Officer. Charlie joined Santee Cooper along with Mark from Arizona, and they both led a similar outfit in some ways, different in others in Arizona. You're also going to hear about Santee Cooper's finances, its debt management from Ken Lott, our Chief Financial and Administration Officer. You're going to hear about diversity efforts from Tracy Grant, our Director of Corporate Services, and Mike Poston, who, Bonnie, for you and others, leads our customer programs on all fronts, wholesale, retail. You're going to hear from him as well, and then Mark's going to close it off with the presentation. We're going to take questions after each segment and look forward to the conversation. I look forward to y'all hearing about what we have going on, and we look forward to hearing your questions. With that, Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thanks to E4 Carolinas. We appreciate this opportunity and very much appreciate our involvement with the institution. And Bonnie, welcome as a Santee Cooper customer. We're glad to have you on board. You know, I'm going to just provide an overview and then turn it over to staff and for individual sections. But kind of by way of background, Charlie and I, as Jeff indicated, joined Santee Cooper in 2019. The nuclear project had been shut down 2 years prior. The ICF process had been completed inconclusively. The Act 95 process was in front of everyone. And I took our assignment as the board gave it to us to make the best and improve everything that could be improved in the best way possible, participate in the Act 95 process straight up and straight through the front door, et cetera, and repair that which needed to be repaired and improve that which could be improved. And we set about to do that with the very fine staff I had found of Santee Cooper at the time. The principals in the nuclear installation were gone, and the opportunity existed thus to kind of improve things. And this is what we did for the most part over that intervening period of time. And it's been a tremendous amount of work. The purpose of doing this, frankly, and it's a topic we all should discuss much more so as soon as we have the opportunity, is to get to the point where we can in fact look to the future and start talking about the future productively. I think the energy future for the state of South Carolina is a complex one. It's not a Santee Cooper issue. It's not a Duke issue. It's not a SCANA issue. It's not a Central issue. It is truly a South Carolina issue, and I look forward to participating in that discussion as we address the energy future for the entirety of the state. But to get to that point, these are the principal efforts over the last couple of years. We settled all of the nuclear and other major litigation, huge effort. Obviously, the Cook settlement was the biggest of them, but there were other parts and pieces of litigation, Hearn, Chirka, the Goose Creek litigation, et cetera. We needed to settle all of that because all of that required that all you're doing is looking back. We wanted to be able to look forward. We did have opportunities and unique opportunities, the entire industry did, to improve fuel economics. So we did that with a great deal of emphasis, and Charlie can talk about that. We clearly reduced the amount cost and the risk of debt. There was in 2016, the debt of Santa Cooper peaked at about $8.2 billion, a stunning number. We've reduced that down now to about $6.8 billion, and we've refinanced somewhere in the neighborhood of $750 to $1 billion worth of debt. We continue on that path to reduce both the amount as well as the cost of debt. We did along the way right-size the organization and reorganized it. It had a staffing level in the neighborhood of 1,850 folks. We're operating now at less than 1,650 folks, and it's been reorganized, as I like to put it, with the right people in the right place doing the right things. That really gave us the opportunity as we addressed the reorganization to substantially enhance diversity, and Tracy Grant will talk about that a little bit later in the presentation as well. Charlie is really an expert in resource planning. That's why I wanted to bring him along. That was essentially the issue that the train got off the tracks on for Sandy Cooper, and we needed to build a new, different, leaner and greener resource plan, and we've done that, and he'll talk about that in his presentation. And then all of that taken together helped to build a new financial plan, and the financial plan basically has price stability very much at its core. If you add up all the favorable economic implications of what we have been able to do, including the addition of a substantial amount of lower cost renewable energy, it will in fact lead to price stability. And our belief and experience tells us that price stability is what customers for the most part want and an economy thrives on. It's instability that creates uncertainty and difficulty and leads to negative economic outcomes. Price stability is key, and that's what the financial plan is all dedicated towards. So this progress led to two things. Next slide. A unanimously adopted reform plan for Santa Cooper Act 90. It was 111, I think, to 0 in the House and 43 to 0 in the Senate. And adding it all together, next slide, please, solidified our credit ratings. Every major credit agency, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P, had a negative outlook on Sandy Cooper. That is, they had the A-rated category, but they anticipated that it was going to drop. With all these changes, with the progress that we've been able to make, and with the reform plan now identifying a new transparency and oversight structure that's reasonable, acceptable to the market, each one of them has removed the negative outlook on Sandy Cooper's credit rating to stable. That is critically important because it allows us to access capitalization mainly for the purpose of refinancing at much more attractive interest rates and improve things even further. So those two things were the product of all that work, and that's where we stand now, and that's where we wanted to be so that we could in fact look to the future. Next slide. Business model, basically, Santa Cooper is a public power entity, as you may know, so it's a public enterprise for the most part. It's not a for-profit. It's not a not-for-profit. It's what I call a for-benefit operation, and it was created way back in the 30s for specific purposes, and those purposes have grown. Those purposes are listed down below. They're what I call the returns or the dividends of this kind of an enterprise. We run it like a business. It is intended to create dividends to its owners, who are the people of South Carolina, and those dividends are listed below. I'll talk about broadband a little bit in a while, but let's go through those benefits. Next slide. Low rates, these are our residential rates. These are in the Myrtle Beach area. We also serve, as you know, Central, the co-op of co-ops, and we serve it at wholesale. It then takes the power that we provide to Central and distributes it amongst its member co-ops, who then subsequently distribute it to retail loads. But the prices that are listed here are our direct retail rates, and they are attractive, relatively speaking, to on both a state and a national basis. What stunned me when I got here is the second bullet, the reliability ranking number 4 out of over 550 IOUs and co-ops in the U.S. It's in the top 1%. That's not our ranking. That's a federal ranking. That's stunning. And our old employee at SRP, Salt River Project in Arizona, we were in the top decile, and we thought that was super. But to be in the top 1% is really stratospheric. It's a great record of reliability, especially in this part of the country. The safety record is excellent, and we've been recognized by APPA as for operational excellence every time it's been awarded since 2006. Next slide. A lesser known function, obviously, we manage the 2 lakes, Lake Moultrie and Lake Marion, but they provide bulk safe drinking water to various areas in the low country, and that system is in fact growing. This is the parallel to Salt River Project in Phoenix, Arizona, where we were both power and water at SRP as well. Obviously, Sandy Cooper has operated the lakes for a long period of time, but has gotten into, as a result, the potable water business or safe drinking water business, and that is growing, as you see. Lake Moultrie, in particular, a couple of 100,000 customers. That's growing. Lake Marion, only 3,000 as of now, but that's going to grow as well. And we have 2 plants that take the water that's stored in Moultrie and Marion and turn it into safe drinking water as well. Next slide. Probably familiar with the economic development story of Sandy Cooper. These kinds of entities, public power entities, certainly SRP and Sandy Cooper, but there's lots of them in the country. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, San Antonio Public Service, Nebraska Public Power District, Long Island Power Authority. They're all economic development entities. They were all created basically for the purpose of providing reliable and low-cost power so that living could be reasonable and commerce could grow and thrive. And so they're all economic development entities. And statutorily, Sandy Cooper has a very similar mission, and you see a number of names there that you recognize, and it remains a purpose of Sandy Cooper to work with all the others, Department of Commerce, all of the co-ops, et cetera, in pursuing economic development in the state of South Carolina. I will tell you that taken together, the efforts of all those parties, we're just one of them, but we are a participant to pursue economic development in the state of South Carolina. I was on the Department of Commerce Economic Development Focus Group for the state of Arizona, and the state of Arizona would be very envious of the success of the focus on economic development in the state of South Carolina. It's great. It's very successful, and a lot of people working well together to do really good things from an economic development point of view. Next slide. We do a lot in the environmental stewardship. I won't talk about the details on this slide, but I would point you to the bottom bullet, which says learn more in our 2020 sustainability report. Sandy Cooper does a lot of things that a lot of people probably do not recognize, and it is recorded in that sustainability report. That's the first sustainability report that Sandy Cooper has written. And the reason I wanted to get it done is because when you ask for all of the things that we do that are positive from a sustainability point of view to be accumulated and put in one place, it's a very, very impressive story. And I would commission you, if you're interested, to look at that sustainability report. I think that's a link that you can get to it if you want to. It's a very good story. Next slide. Sandy Cooper does have a statewide impact. Again, we serve both retail and wholesale statewide. This is a picture of generation facilities. We have over 5,200 miles of transmission lines throughout the state. We have solar schools, solar, wind, landfill, biomass, et cetera, et cetera. That's all located. So it is throughout the state. It is an entity that is present throughout much of the state of South Carolina. That's actually what gives it the capability, Sandy Cooper, the capability to participate in broadband. Because we have transmission facilities throughout the state, we already have what I call verticality, basically poles to attach fiber to. We've already got a lot of dark fiber. We can really help, and we're and we want to. We think that's perfectly consistent with our mission to focus on economic development. Broadband is very much key of that throughout the state of South Carolina. So that's in the statute. We're working with ORS as we speak. Our board has adopted already the approaches to enable people to hook up, use our dark fiber, hook up to our verticality, et cetera, as we promote broadband throughout the state of South Carolina. I'm going to back up again to an earlier comment that I made. This is basically an overall description of Sandy Cooper, but we have gotten to the point, I'm glad to say, of being able to focus on the future. We have Act 90 in hand. We have our credit rating restored, et cetera. We're focused now on the future. It is something that it is a statewide issue. It's not just a Sandy Cooper issue. It's everybody in the state. What's the energy future of the state of South Carolina? And we look forward to getting to that point and working with you as we address that question. I'm going to ask Pamela to talk about some of the particulars of Act 90 and the new transparency and regulatory structure that's been put in place for Sandy Cooper. I think it's a good one. It's certainly not unprecedented in the industry. It's a little different for Sandy Cooper, needless to say, but we worked heavily with the General Assembly on coming up with this particular approach, and I think it's a good, solid approach. I would be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have submitted to the chat room before we go to Pamela, if you want me to.
Mark, it's Weston Adams,
Yes,
Nelson
sir.
Mullins. I do have one question for you here. So it's interesting to me that what piques my interest is certainly the solar, the 425 megawatts of solar. That is a large part, really my practice is a lot of renewable energy stuff. So that piqued my interest. The RFP you did with Central for 425 megawatts, then you've got another 1,000 megawatts coming down the pipe. Can you tell us anything else about the additional 1,000 megawatts?
Yeah, I can. Thank you for the question. That we built it in tranches. We developed a plan to put in roughly 500 megawatt tranches. We spaced them out a little bit over the course of time, which is basically kind of a dollar cost averaging approach to the deployment of the renewables. The next 500 megawatts, we believe, could in fact be developed with existing transmission interconnections. The third tranche, the third 500 megawatts, is necessitating the study that's now being conducted with Dominion on the grid in the state of South Carolina. Our two grids are so heavily overlapping and interconnected that in order to deploy more renewables, we jointly needed to study how that can get done. So that study has actually been going on as of now. So I don't know if that's responsive to your question. There is a provision in Act 90 that speaks to how we, Sandy Cooper, will go about acquiring those tranches of solar, and it basically calls for a bid process. In other words, we're not interested in developing it ourselves. We want to deal with the folks that do that better than we could, and contemplate a process to initiate basically purchase power agreements with solar developers. That's what the 425 is as of now. Am I answering your question?
Oh, absolutely. And then the 200 megawatts of storage would come, say, mid-decade. Is that kind of the thought?
You know, it's a placeholder, Weston. It could come sooner than that. The economics of that technology are improving pretty rapidly. They're probably not improving as rapidly as solar did, but it's very encouraging, and we track that through our participation in EPRI. EPRI is looking at the battery technology development. We actually have some approaches in the house that we're kind of looking at right now. It's a placeholder, so it could happen sooner or later, but it's getting more attractive day by day, and it is something that is going to be a key feature of the grid going forward.
That's great. That's super helpful. Bonnie, I'll let you introduce Pamela if we're ready to move on to her.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I'm going to hand it to you for you to introduce the next Santee Cooper speaker, Pamela Williams.
Yep, Pamela Williams is our Chief Public Affairs Officer and General Counsel, and she's going to give you all an update on Act 90.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. Mark has mentioned Act 90, also known as the Santee Cooper reform legislation. I think many of you out there were engaged with the General Assembly as it considered the future of Santee Cooper and this legislation in particular. I think given that engagement, and I'm going to overuse the word engagement in the next few slides because that really is a key component of Act 90. The engagement that you all had with the General Assembly, with us, in formulating this new legislation has resulted in it being, as Mark mentioned, a very good piece of legislation. We're looking forward to diving in. It has several different components that become effective in a couple of different steps, and I'll talk about those. That the three kind of overarching areas, and I've got 3 slides, are governance changes really to our board. There is new legislative oversight and then also new regulatory oversight. So the governance changes, which became effective when Governor McMaster signed the legislation on June 15th, do change our board. It remains a 12 voting member board. The terms of those board members changed from 7 years to now 4 years. And there is a new 3-term limit that's been imposed. There are also new education and experience qualification requirements, and those are the same requirements that are out there for Public Service Commission members. And really significantly, new diversity standards as the governor and the Senate consider appointments and confirmations. This is something that Santee Cooper had suggested way back in the reform plan under Act 95. Many of you lobbied hard to make sure this was included, and there really wasn't resistance within the General Assembly. So we're very glad to see this incorporated into the standards for board selection. There also are 2 new positions, non-voting ex officio members representing Central Electric Cooperative, our largest customer. Under the statute, 1 representative is either the central board chair or his or her nominee. And that person we know now is Rob Hostetler, who is the CEO of Central. He is the designee of the chair. And then the other ex officio member is elected by the Central Board from amongst its members. And Rob Artis is that representative. Rob is the CEO of Santee Electric Cooperative. There will be a transition for existing board members. All but 1 of the board members who were sitting at the time Act 90 passed will be leaving the board. There will be an orderly transition, which is very important for us for institutional knowledge, for stability as we implement the reform plan and the reform legislation. Also for the credit markets, important for them to see an orderly, steady transition of board members. So 3 terms will expire each year, beginning in January of 2022, and then running through January of 2025. And any board member who was appointed prior to 2018 cannot be reappointed. So that applies to all but 1 of the then sitting board members. Now, as you see the last slide, Peter Mccoy is now our chairman. So Peter has been confirmed by the Senate. He was confirmed both for the seat that he's entering, which is one of the ones that expires this coming January, and he was also confirmed for a subsequent 3-year term. So Peter's on board definitely through January 1, 2026, and we have put him to work. I'll tell you, he's been great. He's jumped in. He's been a tremendous advocate for us. He's learning what we are, and he's a realist. So it's really great to have him on board. Jeff, next one, please. The legislative oversight that I mentioned, the Joint Bond Review Committee, which many of you may know, it's an existing entity made up of General Assembly members from the House and the Senate. They review many financings for different state agencies as well as colleges and universities. We will now be going before them to get approval of debt transactions and real property transactions. We have appeared before them twice already. The JBRC set up a subcommittee specifically to deal with Santee Cooper issues, and there's a meeting of that subcommittee, the first meeting of the subcommittee coming up next week. The agency head salary commission is responsible for approving CEO compensation. Both of those oversight functions began on June 15th, and this last bullet comes into play beginning January. One of the things in Act 90 is a requirement that Santee Cooper conduct a public engagement process as we look at transitioning from our coal-fired generating stations. When you will be the first. And so as we look at closing Wynyard, we need to look at how are employees impacted, how are the communities impacted. And again, some of you out there on the call have worked with us, have provided some good insights, and we will continue to engage with you. Obviously, we're concerned about our employees and making sure that we don't have to lay off folks. We find other places for them or we retrain them. We're hard at that already, and then engaging with the community going forward. We will be required to file annual reports on our efforts with the PERC. Okay, Jeff, next slide. And then the last slide is regulatory oversight. This comes into effect in January of 2022. First, Public Service Commission. We are required to file our IRP every 3 years with the Public Service Commission. It is subject to the commission's approval. One of the things that will be unique to Santee Cooper is we're required to conduct a public engagement process prior to the time that we submit the IRP. This is something that we had planned to do, was part of the reform plan, and now it's codified. So we'll conduct that process, submit the plan to the commission for approval, and then the process from there will be just like most of you are used to with any other IOU. We also now come under the Siting Act, which means that major generation and transmission facilities are subject to approval by the commission. Any purchase power agreements for a duration greater than 10 years or other than renewable power are subject to commission approval. And then Mark also touched on, we are required to have a competitive procurement process for renewable energy, and that process would be approved by the PSC, and we would then conduct the process. And it would be similar to what you all saw, those of you who participated in the first tranche that we conducted last year. And then the Office of Regulatory Staff will also be heavily involved in Santee Cooper. They will participate in our retail rate process. The retail rate process is now codified and set forth in the statute. They will be a party in interest. They will have the ability, along with other customers, to appeal rate adjustments. And they have the authority, just as they do with other utilities in the state, to inspect, audit, and examine Santee Cooper's rates and operations. We also are required to file an annual pricing report. Just it will show how we adhere to our pricing principles, how we stack up with other utilities, how the costs are allocated amongst customers, and that will be filed with ORS annually. One thing that was very important in the legislative process, because of our bond covenants, because of the debt outstanding, is that the Santee Cooper board retains sole rate making authority, and that is codified, continues to be codified. The process is there, the ability to appeal the process is there, public engagement is there, but ultimately the board will make the final decision on rates. And Bonnie, that is Weston, that is my last slide.
Pamela, I'll just ask one lawyer question. There's even yet another layer of review here in the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, effectively, right? I mean, there's reference to that in the statute and the standard in there. And so, I mean, I would say there are actually many layers of review here. I just thought I would flag that for you if you had any comment on that as well.
Yes, Weston, that actually is a very welcome change for us. You know, those of you who are lawyers know that our customers have due process rights. And so we have to follow due process as we look at rate adjustments. When we did not have a codified process, there is some question about, what were we supposed to do? What satisfied due process? Now it's in the code. Now we know what we have to do. And the Supreme Court would be reviewing the process to make sure that we follow the process. It's clear now that any challenge to our rates would go directly to the Supreme Court. Before this legislation, that was not clear. There was a possibility that it would have to go first to a circuit court and then up through the court system. So we view this as very positive. The credit rating agencies actually view this as very positive to give us some certainty and our customers certainty in the rate setting process.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you at this point if you want to carry the baton from here.
Thanks, Weston. And next you all will hear from Charlie Duckworth, our Resource Jedi.
The Jedi who cannot turn off his mute. Good morning, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to share with you about Santee Cooper's plan to transform our generation fleet to a leaner and greener mix while we ensure that it's a reliable supply. I want to take that in two steps. I'm going to start by outlining the directional changes in our plan. These directions were the result of a resource planning process we conducted jointly with Central, and that process was the basis for our IRP filing at the end of last year. I want to be clear up front that because, and Pamela mentioned this briefly, because of the limited time we had to complete that work, we were not able to conduct a robust stakeholder process, but that's something we absolutely intend to do looking forward. And it's something that we've seen a lot of value, Mark and I have, when we've done that in prior, at SRP in prior work. In the second step, I'm going to talk more specifically about our resource plan directions and the need for additional capacity in the late 2020s, which we're addressing currently, and again, in an ongoing process, coordinating with Central. The next two slides, stay on this one, Jeff. The next two slides outline the key strategic directions of our resource fleet changes. First of all, the plan restores the balance of supply and demand. Santee Cooper's we currently have more generation capacity than need or demand. Retiring Winya will be the step that brings us back into balance, which will mean that we more effectively and efficiently use our set of resources. This plan is going to be leaner and greener. I mentioned that before, and more diversified, which I'll highlight in some upcoming bullets. A foundational direction, and this has already been talked about, is the deliberate, meaningful reduction in coal. It's a clear right step that will reduce emissions, it'll reduce cost, and it improves our operating and financial flexibility. The Winya coal station will be retired by 2028, and that's an action that our board has already put into place, and additional coal retirements are possible in the 2030s. We are working with Central to substantially increase our sustainable resources. And again, this has been mentioned before. We, with Central, conducted an competitive RFP process, and as a result, we have contracted to add 425 megawatts of new solar, Central for its load ratio share and Santee Cooper for our load ratio share. And the plan is to add another 1,000 megawatts in future RFP processes. These will all be done through power purchase agreements, again, as that's already been mentioned. We also intend to phase in battery storage as prices continue to fall. And we intend to collaborate with Central to add more demand side programs to the plan. Next slide, please, Jeff. Another direction is the probable addition of natural gas generation after Winya is retired. Natural gas is an important part of an all of the above strategy because it provides critical power system support as coal is retired and provides the resource flexibility that'll be necessary to integrate more solar into the plan. And I'll talk a little bit about that, more about that in a few minutes. An important element of the plan is to ensure optionality to adapt as things change in the future. That this is a critical part of any good plan. It's a capital light plan, and of course, it reduces emissions. Next slide, please. Looking at the sources of electricity by type is a good way to see the implications of the directional changes in a resource plan. And these two discs compare projections of the sources of energy to serve customers in the 2030s. The first on the left is what that would have been under the old resource plan that Santee Cooper had. And the disc on the right is what the resource energy mix would be under the directional changes that I just talked about. Under the old plan, the energy would have, as you can see, would have been predominantly from two sources. About half from coal, which is shown in the burnt orange color there, and about a third from natural gas in brown. In the 2020 plan, together with Central, we've added in another important slice of the pie, about 20% from sustainable resources, solar in this case predominantly, which is the green portion of the slit on the right. And we've balanced more evenly the other sources. Coal drops to about 20% of supply and 30% from natural gas, with another 20% for purchases. The result is lower costs, 55% lower carbon emissions, and importantly, the increased diversity of energy sources makes the 2020 plan much more flexible. It can adapt to changes in future conditions, and those changes will happen. And it's one of our key resource principles to make sure that we have a flexible plan. The specific size of the slices of the pie, if you will, as we continue to update our plan, as we move towards dealing with some of the more recent issues and changes and assumptions that we're seeing, the specific size of the slices will change a bit, but the directional changes and the increased diversity will absolutely be a part of future plans. Next slide, Jeff, please. I'm going to shift now from those directional changes and talk about some work that we're doing right now to deal with updated assumptions and changes over the last several months. In a nutshell, we will have we'll have a significant need for new resources starting in the late 2020s in South Carolina. And Mark mentioned this. This is really a statewide issue. Resources will be needed to replace retired coal and to meet load growth. And in the Santee Cooper Central case, forecasted loads are higher than last year's forecast. Meeting this need will involve looking at the natural gas transportation infrastructure, the electric transmission system, and looking at new generating plants, new generating capacity. Given the time needed for planning and permitting and construction of these facilities, the timeline is going to be tight, and we need to work collaboratively and expeditiously to develop the best statewide approach. Next slide, please, Jeff. This slide shows the Santee Cooper central need for additional generating capacity. Winter peak is in the blue bars that you see there, and summer peak in the red bars. As you see, our need is over 1,000 megawatts starting in 2029. And that's the point, as I mentioned earlier, after 28, Winya would be fully retired. When you step back, so that's the Santee Cooper central need together. When you step back and look at this from a broader statewide perspective, Dominion plans to retire Williams and Wateree in this same time period. That's an additional nearly 1,300 megawatts. And Central has an additional need for 1,100 megawatts due to an expiring power purchase contract. So adding that all up, there's a need for nearly 3,500 megawatts in the late 2020s. All this happens in the same time frame. And that's a big hole to fill. It's going to take statewide approach and collaboration to fill that hole. Next slide, please, Jeff. There's no silver bullet to meeting 3,500 megawatts of need. The best plan will likely include a mix of several alternatives. Some of the need can be met by purchasing existing resources that are available and bringing that capacity in over the transmission system. Of course, there are limits to how much can be imported, and a part of the solution may be expanding the state's transmission import capability, as Mark mentioned earlier. Programs that allow customers to change their energy usage can help us reduce the need, and we need to include that in the mix. And some of this capacity need will likely need to be new build natural gas fired generation so that our state will have a reliable and resilient power supply, and so that we can integrate more solar into the system. This slide illustrates why we'll need to add additional resources. If you look at, well, if you step back, the transmission system, which is delineated here in the high level, is in the green lines that you see on this slide. The transmission system was built to reliably serve load, given where existing generation resources exist. That's the way it's planned. That's the way it's constructed. If you look at the area that's in the oval of this map, today, that's where all of the coal resources that I've mentioned that are planned to be retired, and Cross is in that, the Cross station is in that area as well. If you look at today where we sit, if you look at the existing resources list that's on the left side of this chart, today there are nearly 6,000 megawatts in that oval area to be able to provide reliable supply and meet the load demand on our system. That's a lot of resources to choose from to provide that reliable service. And again, the transmission system was constructed with those particular resources in mind. When you look at 2030 and remove the planned coal retirements, Winya, Williams, and Wateree, if you look over in the little category on the right, bottom right of this chart, inside of the oval goes from today's 6,000 megawatts, and unless there's new generation and or transmission built, enhancements built, then it drops to about 2,400 megawatts. That means as we retire coal plants, which is absolutely the right thing to do, we need to add new capacity in this oval area and jointly add to our transmission to ensure that we can reliably serve load. We can't go from 6,000 megawatts of load serving capability to 2,400. Matching the location of adding capacity is important to be able to use the fundamental elements of our transmission system to provide reliable service to our customers. Next slide, please, Jeff. As I said earlier, planning for additional resources, gas-fired resources, to ensure a low-cost, reliable, and resilient power supply involves three pieces, and one of those is natural gas transportation. This slide shows the existing gas pipelines in and near South Carolina. There's a lot of work to be done before we'll have answers to what might be needed and best in this regard. But there are a few fundamental conclusions you can draw from looking at this chart. First, South Carolina, if we're going to grow, needs to have more gas transportation capability. You see them on the map that there are existing pipelines today: Transco, Southern Natural Gas, the Elba Express, and Carolina gas transmission, but there isn't much, if any, firm gas transportation available on these pipelines. You also see that the sites where it makes sense to add new generation, the sites inside that oval that I talked about that have electric transmission interconnection available, they don't have a firm gas supply today. They don't have access to gas today. A key part of meeting the need for new generation is determining the best sites for this additional generation, and that the work for determining that is something that's underway, again, in collaboration with Central. Next slide, Jeff, please. This is a listing of some of our key next steps, and this is my last slide. These are steps that are underway. We're working collaboratively with Central on these. And as Mark mentioned earlier, we have an ongoing study of the transmission system with Dominion. We're working on identifying, first bullet there, the best sites for the additional generation. That'll be key to ensuring a low cost and reliable supply. An important element of this work is studying the implications for the electric transmission system, asking questions about where those additions can best be placed to take advantage of the existing electric transmission system so that we can minimize the costs associated with that and maximize and maintain the ongoing import capability, which is an important part of our plan. We're assessing the opportunity to contract for or acquire existing resources to meet a part of this need. Again, as I said earlier, there's no silver bullet. There's no one resource answer to this question. It's going to be a combination of things. We are working to identify portfolios that are low cost, low execution risk, and flexible as we go forward. And we need to work efficiently, as I've mentioned earlier, to given the timeline. And I want to be clear on the last bullet that a key element of any updated plan that's going to come out of this, and Mark has mentioned this in response to a question, will be to continue to add significant solar to our system. And we'll do that through a competitive solicitation process that is consistent with Act 90. It's foundational. This addition of solar is foundational to accomplish the needed changes in our plan. And that is something we absolutely will continue down the path on. So that concludes my prepared material. I'll turn that back over and answer any question that may have come up. And then I think Ken Lott is up next.
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. So this is Brian Stone from Lockhart Power, and this subject obviously has a lot of interest. The chat room exploded. I'm not going to try to get to all of those comments and questions, and I probably had that many myself. But if I can, let me ask a few that are kind of run the gambit to some extent, and maybe get some relatively quick responses, and then maybe at the end time for a little bit more. It looks like anytime I see a model that starts with a pie chart of what the portfolio looks like now, and then goes to a pie chart that has more and smaller chunks, that is a good thing in my mind. In general, these days it tends to show more diversification. It shows, I think, more movement towards renewables, and so we always look for continuous improvement at our utility. I'm sure you all are the same way. So it definitely looks like a significant improvement versus where you all have been in the past. Both from a diversification and from a movement towards renewables, which I think everybody's very interested in, judging by the questions for sure. So a couple questions along those lines. One thing that was interesting to me, and others picked up on it, the amount of nuclear is basically flat. It actually ticks up a bit from 9 to 10%. Is that just a function of your changed demand for an energy forecast? Is the same amount of nuclear, maybe just a little higher percentage because your load's expected to drop a bit, or do you see some opportunity in the future for some form of advanced nuclear, which is something E4 Carolinas has a group that's working on exploring in the States?
As a part of that chart, it's not an increase in the amount of nuclear that we receive. We too have an interest in advanced nuclear options. I think that that's something that we certainly would remain, we would keep an eye on. We have an interest in that. It is not something that today we've included in our plan.
Okay. The biggest change to me that stuck out was going from 5 to 20%. I'm going from memory, I didn't make a note of it, but I think it's from 5 to 20% on outside or purchase opportunity type purchases in that generation. So, to the extent that that's available and makes sense economically, that's fantastic, right? I mean, that allows you a lot of flexibility, as you pointed out, a lot of optionality, which is very helpful. The downside, of course, is that longer term, at least, there's some risk as to whether or not that will continue to be available. So are those that big increase, did that tie back to the slide that you had about all the different sources within the southern part of the state that are currently available? And are those mostly natural gas, or what sources are those?
Those sources are mostly natural gas. It does tie back to that, and all of these the changes in those pie charts are to some extent driven by or affected by the assumptions that you make. One of the critical steps in any planning process is to vary those assumptions and to understand how things would change when you vary those. So it is a reflection that there are a number of existing resources available, natural gas predominantly, yes, and that when you run a model that basically looks for the most cost-effective way to meet the needs that are there, one of the things that comes out of that would be purchases. It avoids capital, which is something that we're working to make sure. Now you can't rely on that for too much of the mix, but as a part of it, it is something that came out of the work, the 2020 resource plan that we filed at the end of last year.
Okay, great. And so in general, if we could snap our fingers and solar plus battery was as economical today as natural gas that's existing is, then obviously we would move to that, but it's not. What's your, it looks like your plan has flexibility as far as the exact timing of, I think you said in 2025, you would start shifting towards batteries and had a pretty significant amount of battery installations over some period of time. That nobody knows exactly what the drop in battery prices is going to look like until it shows up, right? So we can project it out now, but until it comes time to actually buy the batteries, who knows? I guess your plan since at the beginning, it sounds like the focus of Santee Cooper was on price stability. Obviously, costs are very important. That your plan has a lot of optionality to first convert from coal to natural gas, which is very good from an environmental footprint, but over some period of time to convert some amount at least of base load over to solar or other renewable plus battery. Is that accurate? Can you talk a little bit about those thoughts?
Lots of pieces in that. So make sure that I'm covering what you all want to hear. Clearly, battery costs are dropping, and what you said from our perspective is accurate. With today's assumptions, including looking at the range of assumptions in sensitivity cases, in today's assumptions, out in the time frame that I was specifically pointing at here, late 20s, the natural and a piece of the solution that came out consistently on top from a cost and reliability perspective on today's assumptions is natural gas. For a piece, not just it provides the support that we need. Of course, things change, and we've all seen that very, very well over the last couple of years. If batteries technology, if prices continue to drop or drop much more rapidly than expected, or there's a new a breakthrough in a new type of battery that has more storage density, those kinds of things could change. One of the things we are trying to do is build flexibility into the plan to be able to adapt to those kinds of changes. That said, we have to begin moving down the path of creating the options that make the most sense based on what we see today. And that's why I was talking earlier about the timeline being tight from a planning, from a permitting, from those kinds of perspectives. The timeline is tight to be able to add gas to our system. That said, you don't start spending big capital dollars on that project for a few years. Things fundamentally change. We're always open to making changes to adapt to that. Absolutely.
Okay, and one more question, the last one for now. And it is hard, I think, to build a new natural gas plant now, given the uncertainty with climate change and future carbon taxes and all of that is a factor to consider more so than 10 or 20 years ago. Last question I have is one thing that at Lockhart Power, we're a smaller utility. We're very close to the counties that we serve. And one thing we like about solar is that you can put in, good size, meaningful size solar projects, but spread those out across multiple counties in order to get several benefits. There's benefits associated with just general distributed generation. There's benefits including I guess the transmission system impact and not having one large, very large plant and all the transmission infrastructure that goes with that, and others. One big one that we like is that it's a way to spread out the economic benefit associated with these capital investments to the counties. So it's not, there's not one county that has a multi-billion-dollar plant. There's a number of counties that have $100 million plus plants. I guess from those, what are those things that you focus on when you look at solar and how you're going to to buy solar? It sounds like through PPAs, and where you would prefer to have those sited over time.
Well, you've mentioned a number of those factors. We would be clearly the benefits that you just talked about. We're looking at as well. We are looking carefully at the transmission system and where those resources could be placed to be most advantageous for our transmission system. We're looking to spread those resources out geographically for operational reasons. If you have cloud cover come over and you have all of your solar in one particular area, then you have a big operational change that we have to have resources, flexible resources to be able to back up so that we can maintain the reliability necessary to support the additional solar that would be added. So we're looking at those kinds of factors as well as the financial capability of the entities that are developing, proposing to develop those solar projects and all of that as well. I don't know. There was a lot in that question, and I'm not sure that I answered that.
That's perfect. No, that's perfect. It's very thoughtful. All the answers very thoughtful. The plan, I believe, appears very thoughtful. So we appreciate the presentation, and I'll turn it back over to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Next, you're going to hear from Ken Lawton. Our target for the presentation was to finish by 11:30. I did want to let anyone know who's listening, and I think E4 is already aware of this, that our folks are going to be available a little after 11:30 to take any questions at the end that may not have been able to get addressed during the presentation. So next up, Ken Lott talking about debt management.
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you this morning. As Mark mentioned previously, as he talked about some of the improvements Santee Cooper has made, an important component of our ability to provide competitive rates for our customers is our effective management of Santee Cooper's debt. As you can see in this slide, in 2016, Santee Cooper had $8.2 billion in outstanding debt. And I do at the beginning here want to point out that Santee Cooper's debt, 100% of it is pledged against the future revenues of Santee Cooper. And by law, the state has no obligation for that debt. So just want to clarify that. I think a lot of times people don't quite understand that. But 8.2 billion started in 2016. And as you can see clearly on the slide, we've paid down 1.4 billion with a B by the end of through 2020. This also includes issuing $450 million in new debt in order to fund our capital improvement projects, which are always needed to maintain and grow a safe and reliable system for our customers. Over that time, we have also refinanced existing debt that has resulted in approximately $380 million in future debt service payment reductions for our customers. Our existing debt schedule has also been de-risked and levelized. And what I mean by that is our debt payments are relatively flat through 2030. And you've heard a lot of talk about price stability as being a fundamental strategic component for Santee Cooper. It's what our customers want. And so levelizing our debt service certainly helps with that. Santee Cooper's current financial plans call for continued debt reduction. And to give you an example, our current debt service schedule, which tells us what our debt payments are going to be, principal and interest over the life of the debt, we have over $500 million in principal payments in 22 through 24. So over $500 million in principal payments, which is debt reduction between now and 2024. And as we begin to move into the next slide, what you will notice is that we were able to take advantage of the current interest rate market, and we've already borrowed through our capital needs through the beginning of 2023. And so when we look to 2023, we'll be making some pretty hefty principal payments and do not plan to incur any significant debt for our capital improvement program there. Next slide, Jeff. So I wanted to cover 2021 AB debt transaction that just closed on September 2nd. The transaction included $145.7 million refunding Series A bonds and $284.6 million in improvement Series B bonds. And so what all that means is that we refunded, with that money, we refunded approximately $174 million in existing debt, lower interest rates, which resulted in approximately $50 million in net present value savings for our customers. We were also able to take advantage of the interest rate environment, and we converted approximately $190 million in short-term variable rate debt to fixed rate debt at a much lower, at a low interest rate. It also provided approximately $160 million to use towards future capital projects, as I mentioned, through the beginning of 2023. The all-in true interest cost of 2.72 is, as long as I've been here and everybody I've spoken to, by far the lowest interest rate on Santee Cooper's debt that we've ever experienced. I do want to point out the 2021 bonds were approved as required by law by the South Carolina Joint Bond Review Committee on April 17th, 2021. And as you know, when we moved into the transaction, as we hoped, the offering received tremendously strong interest. We have roughly 30 large institutional investors placing orders for the bonds. The largest were placed by well-known investment managers such as Vanguard, Mackey Shields, Standish Mellon, Capital Group, Alliance Bernstein, T. Rowe Price, Nuveen, and Putnam, all with individual orders in excess of $50 million. The overall demand for our offering was $1.8 billion. So in other words, we were over 4 times oversubscribed. So again, just tremendous demand, and that demand allowed us to reduce yields on the bonds and again, lower prices for our customers. The 2021 AB transaction was certainly a tremendous success for Santee Cooper. We believe that the strong response by investors validates the debt management strategies that Santee Cooper is executing. And this transaction certainly moved us further along in our plan to reduce debt and achieve real savings for our customers as well. Next slide. So finally, as we continue to look forward, Santee Cooper has almost $4 billion in refunding candidates. And what I mean by that is their bonds are callable between 2023 and 2026. Their average coupons of those bonds are about 5%. So obviously, we've talked about what the rates are today. Substantial savings are available under current market conditions. However, we cannot call the bonds right now. So between today and when those bonds can be callable, we have interest rate risk. Prior to 2018, we could issue tax advance refunding bonds for tax exempt bonds that were more than 90 days before their call date. We can't do that anymore. Federal government has a limit date as an option. So currently what we are doing, we are evaluating our other refinancing alternatives that are available to try to capture savings from today's low rates. And some of those examples are tender and exchange transactions, forward delivery bonds, and also possibly interest rate swaps. So that goes without saying, Santee Cooper's ability to capture today's current interest rate market is extremely important to us as we move forward and continue to manage our debt and lower costs for our customers. And that is really, if there's, I'll accept any questions. Those are really my comments for Santee Cooper's debt management plan.
Hey, Ken, it's Weston Adams. Just one question for you that I got via text from somebody. Can you project that arc of debt reduction any further beyond the 2020 that's on this, your first slide? I mean, you have the arc. The person's question is the arc is going in the right direction. Can you project it out beyond the 2020 number that's on here?
What I would tell you is that our current financial plans, which are always subject to operational changes and impacts, show by in the 2030s us getting back to where we were before the nuclear project existed. That's great.
And then a question on the next slide. I also got this. The all-in true interest rate is 2.72%. How does that compare to other non-IOU utilities? How would you compare that number? You might not have that data, but somebody asked me.
I don't know. I don't have that data in front of me, Weston. Like I say, I know it's the best interest rate Santee Cooper has got. Certainly, the amount of interest in our bonds, 4 times oversubscribed, helped us to squeeze those rates to the best that we could and lower almost across every offering, every maturity date that we had, every QSIP number. We were able to tighten up those original spreads as we work towards finalizing that deal.
Ken, that's super helpful. I think we better turn back to the next speaker just to make this deadline that we've got. So I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thanks.
Next, you all will hear from Tracy Grant. One thing that Mark, when he came on board a little over 2 years ago, adopted a very lean forward approach to addressing diversity, and Tracy Grant's going to talk about some of those efforts.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here to share with you some of Santee Cooper's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, and to share some of the things we've achieved and what we are continuing to work towards. First, I just want to say that Santee Cooper is committed to a workplace that embraces fairness and inclusion. This is very essential to our mission to be the state's leading resource to improve the lives of all South Carolinians. Also, we have a diverse customer base and serve a diverse state, which makes this focus all the more important. So the slide you see in front of you, I want to share some progress we've made in management staffing. Just in the last 5 years, we have significantly improved diversity among our senior management team, which consists of direct reports to the CEO and their management reports. The representation of people of color in this group has grown from less than 3% 5 years ago to 20% today, even as the size of the executive group overall has declined by 15%. While we are very proud of this progress, there is still work to do. Like most organizations, Santee Cooper is reevaluating our policies and practices and identifying areas where we can improve. Next slide, Jeff. So one of the things we've done is we've established an advisory body of employees in 2020, and these employees work to support corporate strategies that will increase diversity, equity, and inclusion, bring awareness, reinforce and enhance the culture of equity and inclusion, and increase Santee Cooper's diversity footprint. Some of the things that we have achieved to date include reevaluating the content of our DE&I training programs produced by our Learning and Development Department. One thing as a council, we discussed the importance of being able to educate and bring awareness to what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. That's a big part of how we can be successful in allowing others to embrace diversity, equity, and awareness. It's so important for them to understand what it means. Employees have a direct line to the IDEA Council to give feedback as well on diversity and inclusion matters at Santee Cooper. Some of our other awareness initiatives, we've highlighted Diversity Heritage Month throughout the year. We've spotlighted employee testimony videos. And by doing this, it has increased employee visits by 80% to our diversity and inclusion iPort page. We think by doing this, again, it brings awareness, it generates discussions, having conversations with others so that they can find what's in common and we can work together towards a common goal. We also hosted a lunch and learn session on overcoming adversity and achieving unity in the workplace, which was very well attended. It was a very successful lunch and learn session. Here are some other things that we're working on. Jeff, next slide, sorry. We're also exploring collaboration opportunities with South Carolina State University, one of 8 historically Black colleges and universities in the state of South Carolina. And I'm also proud to say that I'm a product of that university. So we're very excited and looking forward to some opportunities there. We're also working on establishing diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics, because we know what does not get measured does not get done. So in doing this, we want to establish metrics to identify risk areas where our problem areas are, prioritize our initiatives, set goals, assign accountability. Accountability is very important. Measure the impact of these initiatives. And these metrics are intended to provide initial focus and feedback on the key components that drive a diverse and inclusive workplace. Next slide, Jeff. So I've talked a lot about increasing our diversity footprint in the workplace, but it's also important to ensure that we take that beyond the walls of Santee Cooper. So we have a supplier diversity initiative where we're trying to increase our diverse suppliers. We are committed to this. Our supply chain group, they are working really hard on different initiatives to support this strategy. The strategy will expand the pool of potential suppliers, enhances competition, improves resilience and bounce back of our supply chain. It provides societal benefits through economic opportunity for disadvantaged communities. So our supply chain group became a member of the Carolinas, Virginia Minority Supplier Development Council in August. And they attended an orientation to learn more about the group. Being a part of this council will bring lots of benefits that will help the supply chain group in achieving their goals. It provides unique training to help develop and refine their minority supplier programs. It gives access to large pools of qualified suppliers. It provides resources to help achieve a supplier base that more closely reflects customer demographics. And it adds recognition to stakeholders in the local community of a strong corporate citizenship. Another initiative in November, this group will be hosting a virtual vendor fair. And we feel like this will be a big opportunity to bring in minority businesses. With this fair, they will educate suppliers on the process for doing business with Santee Cooper, which of course, by learning that, they could be certified with other businesses throughout the state. We will partner with the Small Minority Business Contracting and Certification Group, also known as the SMBCC, as well as the Minority Business Development Agency, and other organizations to provide booths at the event in the future. This time it's going to be virtual, but in the future, we hope to have these vendor fairs in person. We will also begin tracking established goals and metrics, because as we said, what does not get measured does not get done. So that will be very important. Not only do these initiatives identify opportunities to increase our diverse suppliers, but it also includes outreach, which we feel will create longer-term results. That concludes my update for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Tracy, that's great. I've got a question. I'm going to hold it till after the last presentation to give it as much time as possible. I did just want to make a general comment. You know, we're implementing a D&I program of our own. I think a lot of people judge utilities and other companies based on how well they do what they have to do. I also like to look at what they choose to do as a measure of the character of the company, in this case, the utility. So I think it speaks a lot to Santee Cooper's character, that in the midst of everything else that has going on, advertises this initiative in the way that it has. So I think that's great. And now I'll turn it over to Jeff to introduce the last speaker.
Thanks, Brian. Next, you're going to hear from Mike Poston, who, as I mentioned before, is in charge of our Chief Customer Officer, Retail Wholesale, and he's going to cover some customer programs.
Thank you, Jeff. And good morning. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about our customer initiatives, offerings, and broadband program. And I'll start with one of the most important strategic initiatives on the retail side, and that's the rollout of our advanced metering infrastructure, or AMI meters. The target for completion of this project is the end of 2021. And currently we're at 95% complete with about 185,000 meters installed. So we're well on our way to meeting that target. And we completing this project because of the tremendous benefit it brings to our customers as well as Santee Cooper. And, you know, these include automated outage notification. These meters allow us to automate our field activities with remote meter reads, remote disconnects, remote connects. We no longer have to roll the trucks. We can use the data from these meters in developing dynamic rate structures in the future, such as time of use and critical peak pricing. And then you have the whole world of data analytics from the smart meter data, you know, and that'll help us transition from being reactive to proactive. You know, many of our programs are still in the planning stage. You know, you'll have improved customer communications and engagements from notifications and alerts for bills, usage and outages. Daily usage information will be available along with bill projections. You know, we'll be able to notify customers, hey, if you keep using at this pace, you're going to have a high bill. And all this will give customers greater insight control over their usage behavior. You know, one program that we will roll out by the end of the year is a pick your due date option. With AMI meters, we're reading, you know, taking meter reads throughout the month. So customers will be able to pick the day of the month that they want their bill due. I'm going to switch gears a little bit now to our beneficial electrification programs. And we are now offering $500 rebates to customers who install level 2 charging stations for electric vehicles. As everyone probably knows here, electric vehicles is one of the most impactful occurrences to the electric utility industry in recent history. And, you know, us as utilities must plan for the consumer adoption and design programs that mitigate the impact on the grid. So this year we began offering those $500 rebates to customers for, you know, installing those charging stations at home. And the program was so popular that we increased our target by 50%. You know, we didn't want to slow the momentum of the program, so we increased our target. We're also installing 10 publicly accessible charging stations along the Grand Strand. About 10 years ago, in conjunction with a Plug-in Carolinas grant, we installed 10 charging stations, and now we are refreshing those charging stations to level 2 charging stations with 6 entities, and the response has been overwhelmingly positive as well. Santee Cooper is adding EVs to its fleet, and we've got a target of a minimum target of 60 by 2030, and I feel sure that target will increase as EVs become more prevalent. And we are installing charging stations at our facilities as well. You know, these charging, we have installed 10 already, and we will install more as Santee Cooper purchases more EVs and as employees purchase more EVs as well. And then finally on this, we've also formed an EV task force that will explore and develop initiatives that will promote EV adoption. And we expect the program announcement early in 2022 to promote the infrastructure build out. Jeff, next slide, please. Now I'd like to mention our conservation and energy efficiency offerings. In January 2021, Santee Cooper launched Empower SC, the power is yours. This is a conservation, energy efficiency, and electrification umbrella program that emphasizes that our customers are in control of their power needs. And what we want to do is give our customers the tools to provide them the ability to take charge of their energy needs. The 2030 Empower SC portfolio, it focuses on additional rebates and loans for energy efficiency savings for our customers. It will also include solar programs, community solar, as well as rooftop, with rebates for those and renewable energy loans. A demand response program will also be part of that. And Charlie mentioned that earlier, and that program name is called Smart Rewards. And initially, we're going to focus on HVAC systems and water heaters. And this program will help us reduce our peak, and that saves our customers money. You know, and during times when we need to reduce demand, we will call on these water heaters and these HVAC systems. And in the future, we could call on battery utility and customer battery systems as well. So we got a look at it. You know, these programs I mentioned allows the customer to take advantage of the latest technology and innovations, and while saving them energy and money. And, you know, and that helps us to reduce our environmental footprint as well. Jeff, next slide. Now, Mark mentioned this earlier, but I'd like to talk a few moments about our broadband initiative. You know, as everyone knows, the COVID-19 pandemic created many challenges, and broadband service is a major example of that. When schools switched to remote learning, access to broadband became a major obstacle, and it also affected other industries such as healthcare as well. And as a result, the General Assembly in South Carolina adopted a Broadband Accessibility Act, and that was intended to improve access to broadband across the state. You know, Santee Cooper does not want to be a broadband provider. Rather, we have developed a broadband program, you know, in conjunction with the Act that will enable broadband providers to expand access to across the state, you know, hopefully more quickly and less expensively. You know, we have an electric transmission infrastructure that can be used to expand broadband across the state. And we've inventoried our excess fiber. And also we've inventoried our what we feel is our pole attachment availability, you know, on more than 5,000 miles of transmission across the state. You know, and as part of our program development, you know, Santee Cooper adopted principles to ensure that we were fair and that we didn't disrupt existing markets. And, and some of those principles include enabling expansion of broadband with emphasis on unserved and underserved areas. We wanted to provide access to our infrastructure on a non-discriminatory basis. There will be no impact to the reliability of the electric infrastructure. In pricing, we will offer access to our excess fiber capacity at market rates and on terms and conditions that will not disrupt markets, and our pole attachment rates will be cost-based. There will be no cost shift to our electric and water customers. We will engage federal and state officials and communication service providers and county and municipal entities to work together to expand broadband service to the unserved and underserved areas. And also, and finally, transparency. We will publish and report the use of our infrastructure to enable broadband, and we'll do so in a public forum. And on April 26, 2021, the Santee Cooper Board of Directors adopted rates and terms and conditions for accessing our transmission infrastructure. And then the program began on May 26, 2021. And then my final slide that you see here, this is a broadband coverage map of the state with an overlay of Santee Cooper's transmission lines as well as fiber routes. And as you can see, we have infrastructure across the majority of the state that can be used to expand broadband access. All the brown or white areas are the unserved and underserved areas. And the majority of these areas reside in rural areas where it's not economical to install the infrastructure. And again, that's where we feel we can help to utilize our infrastructure to expand it more quickly and again, less costly. And finally, Santee Cooper is collaborating with the Office of Regulatory Staff, and we are looking at funding opportunities to identify ways that Santee Cooper can bridge that gap in the middle mile, as we call it, to potentially speed up the broadband deployment increase. So any questions on our program offerings, or I'll be glad to take them now.
Hey, Mike, it's Weston Adams. I do have one question, but I might hold it till the end and turn back to Jeff just in the light of time. And so if we've got time for it, I'll come back to you.
Again. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. And Weston. We'll turn it over to Mark to conclude us.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I just wanted to return to this particular slide and reemphasize the point that the definition of the energy future of the state of South Carolina is in fact a state of South Carolina issue. It's not a Santee Cooper or a Dominion or a Duke or a Central issue alone. We all need to get together and talk about how these needs are supplied in the future, and you can see that it's a pretty big need. Next slide. We do have the opportunity to avail ourselves of a favorable interest rate environment. Ken spoke about this a little bit, close to $4 billion worth of bonds. We will be taking steps very near term, and you'll probably see them or read about them, to refinance up to $1 to $1.5 billion of the remaining $4 billion. Depends on the market reception. The first thing we'll do is a tender offer. That proposal is in front of the JBRC next Thursday, as Pamela mentioned, and we'll work out a schedule with them, hopefully, to begin taking steps to avail ourselves of this tremendous opportunity. It does help us stabilize prices in the future. And with that, let me go to the last slide. As I mentioned, it's great to get to the point where we can look at the future. As you know, the Cook settlement itself called for a rate lock period. That rate lock began last August. It also called for the reimbursement of $200 million from Santee Cooper to customers directly, as well as through the co-ops, which we have commenced. That rate lock period extends through 2024. Our strategic objective thus becomes crafting what I call a soft landing, or preserving price stability for as long thereafter as we possibly can. And the unique thing about the times that we're in are that in the old days, and I've been in this business for a long period of time, longer than I wish to recount, but your long run marginal cost always ended up being higher than your historical cost. So every time you added a resource, there was sticker shock. It's such a unique time in the industry that today our long-run marginal cost may in fact be lower than our historical cost as we move. And that reemphasizes the need to create as much optionality in our resource plan as we possibly can, because things are moving in a more favorable direction, not less, and will enable the kind of price stability that I think everybody tends to appreciate. And this is our projection. This is what we're working towards. And the refinancing helps in that regard. The optionality of the resource plan helps in that regard. The hedging program that we've had in place helps in that regard as well. So this remains kind of a fundamental objective and a fundamental obligation of an entity such as a Santee Cooper to keep prices as reasonable and stable as they can for a long period of time. And with that, I will close and we'll take any questions that anybody has.
Jeff, how much time do you want us to spend here just to make sure we're keeping these guys out the door when they're, tell us when you'd like us to wrap this up. I've got one or two that I could ask.
Mark, you good for 5 more minutes?
I am.
Yeah, this is a question for Mike, really, and that question is around the EV publicly accessible charging stations. I know that Duke has rolled out some pretty significant pilot programs in different states in the Southeast for a significant number of charging stations. I'm just curious, do you all have plans for beyond the 10 publicly accessible? Any thought on sort of pilot programs that would go beyond that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mentioned the internal EV task force, and that group is working on ways on a grant program as a means to expand the charging infrastructure. So yes, we are looking at that, and that's probably be rolled out in early 2022, we think.
Mike, that's great. I think Brian, you might have had a question for Tracy.
Well, there's one, Tracy, in the metrics that you mentioned. I don't know if it's a little early yet. You're probably still developing those. And one thing about this area of DE&I is we found it to be extremely challenging to come up with a quantitative set of metrics to really gauge progress. Have you all kind of honed in on one or two metrics so far that you think are going to be kind of more key than others? Still too early.
Yeah, so we've established some key areas. Some of the areas we're looking at is compensation, recruitment, training, retention, and also representation throughout the company. So, and within those areas, we have come up with some metrics and calculating or measuring how well we're doing in those areas. I'm sorry, one I missed was supply diversity as well.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Perfectly.
Okay.
I had one other one I can ask. Is if Pamela's still on, or this may be for Mark, whoever wants to jump in. Yeah, you mentioned the new legislation and the regulatory requirements associated with that between the PSC and the ORS. I don't think I saw a mention of the consumer advocate, and I don't know if the legislation had any requirements. Would they be involved, for example, with the IRP process or any other processes, or do they not have a role with you?
Brian, if that's all right, Mark, there's not a specific reference to the consumer advocate in the legislation, but obviously we welcome all comers to the process, and we would expect to engage with whomever might want to intervene.
Thanks.
Well, Pamela, maybe one last question for you. I've had a couple of questions in here about environmental justice in the location of new generation resources, impacts on income communities. Any comments on that, thoughts on that?
Well, it's certainly something we would look at. We're conscious of it. Anytime we look at a new site, that would be part of the evaluation. So yes.
And for Charlie, there are also a few questions in the chat about just the mix going forward, and I know we have a lot of constituents who are in the renewable energy business directly or at least indirectly. So that one pie chart kind of before, I think it focused on energy. Would it look the same if it showed demand? because with solar in particular, if you're adding 1,500 megawatts, it seems like that would be a more notable slice of the pie, so to speak, than it was showing energy. But I don't know which it was using.
A capacity chart, it's a good question. A capacity chart would be different, not just for solar, but clearly what you just described, because of the limited energy output of solar relative to capacity, it would be a bigger slice of the pie on a capacity basis.
Thanks.
Jeff, I think we might let these guys go unless you've got other thoughts.
No,
I just
we
have one
appreciate
other-
it.
I've got
Thank
one
you.
other comment, Weston, if it'd be okay with you, just quickly. The board of, the board of Santee Cooper has authorized the establishment of a stakeholder input committee, which I think is a very significant step and recognizes Santee Cooper recognizing the need for such an entity. And it would be an adjunct to the board. It would meet on a regular basis 2 or 3 times per year and cover the programs and the approaches and the strategies, et cetera, of Santee Cooper, and it would involve a wide cross-section of various stakeholders, not only customers, but external stakeholders as well. It's the same, it would be the same kind of body that would be created to review an IRP and a public IRP process. I think that's a very positive, proactive step, and we're in the process of beginning to populate that body as we speak, and would intend to kind of kick it off in 2022 as well.
And I just want to thank all the Santee Cooper folks. This was very informative. Brian may have a final thought as well.
No, I think it was great. It's Mark, my understanding is that that you've been here a few years and maybe exiting before too long, but it's pretty spectacular, the progress and changes that you've been able to steward and your team. I say congratulations. It's something to be very proud of, I think.
Thank you. Thank you much.
So again, thank you to everyone who participated with us today. I'll real quick share one last question in the chat. How would a company, Mr. Bonsall, become a part of that stakeholder group, or at least express an interest in that?
Give me a call. We're in the process of putting it together right now. No, seriously, we're in the process of putting it together right now. We're reaching out to various constituencies. So, and clearly we're going to engage many stakeholder groups, the conservation community, the environmental community, the Department of Commerce, hopefully the Department of Natural Resources, all of our customer classifications, et cetera. We're trying to put together a widespread group so we can accumulate the kind of input that this board needs to make the best decisions possible. So give me a call, or Pamela. Pamela's actually in charge of putting it together. So either one of us.
Thank you so much. And you were kind enough to, and some others of your team were kind enough to join us last year in the fall. And you may remember me saying just how refreshing it is to observe Santee Cooper these days. As you know now, I'm a customer, so I really appreciate the spirit of openness and engagement. It is honestly a marked difference from the past, and we're so grateful for it. And again, grateful for your engagement with us today and this audience group. Thank you so much. And we look forward to continuing to bring great programs like this to our South Carolina Clean Energy Interest Group community. And again, I'm going to shamelessly plug our conference and energy law seminar coming up in Greenville, December 9th and 10th. Be there or be square.
There or be square, right?
or we may actually all be square, coming to each other virtually. So we'll just have to see. But again, thanks so much to everyone who joined us today. Thank you to the Santee Cooper team. We are really grateful to have you with us.